to things in the chat if you have a question or need a clarifying point. They've seen me talk about this stuff before. Almost everyone on the Hub team, I think, could probably give this presentation maybe even more interestingly than I could. So they'll be able to help you with any questions you might have along the way. But again, people often ask what RUBI is, and the name is an acronym, and it stood for Research Units on Behavioral Intervention. The idea is that we were researching what kinds of behavioral skills can we give to parents to help make their lives and their children's lives more full. That was really our focus. We spent a lot of years building this program, and now I've been working over the last 4 or 5 years to really work at disseminating it. If you had a chance to see RUBI Part 1, I spent a lot of time talking about how do we set kids up for success so that there really aren't any interfering behaviors that would overcome their lives and increase the likelihood that they can't participate in certain activities. We spent some time talking about other strategies to really reduce those interfering behaviors. And there were a few comments that I didn't get to that I'll get to today as part of that. But the main goal for part 2 of this conversation is to talk more about how do we build up new skills. And so one way that RUBI tries to help families is it tries to reduce problem behaviors. Most of that we talked about last time. We'll talk a little bit about it today. The other way that we try to improve everybody's participation in lots of areas of life is by increasing new behaviors. And that's going to be the bulk of what we talk about today. One of those final strategies that I was in the midst of finishing up talking about it in our last session, and again, not everyone here was in the last session, but many of you were, I was talking about how do we ignore certain problem behaviors. And one of the things that I was reminded about after our session was that sometimes when we talk about planned ignoring as clinicians, it could be misunderstood what we're talking about. We certainly don't intend to want to communicate to families that you should be ignoring your children in any kind of malintended way, any kind of bad way, any kind of abusive way, right? The real point here, and one of our Hub team members, Maddie, they pointed out to me that this is really about really intentional attention. You're paying attention to your kids in ways that help to promote their success. And so in some ways, I wish the last 70 years of research on this topic had Maddie around to help influence it, because it's a wonderful term, intentional attention. I'll say a little bit more about that, but before I do, let me just highlight these 3 different areas of how do we do this kind of intentional attention or planned ignoring. If that term feels better to you because you heard it before, you could still use it. And the most classic way that we do this is that when a child is engaged in a difficult or interrupting behavior, an interfering behavior for them, a temper tantrum, for instance, a meltdown, some people might call it, it's probably best, if the child's safe, to just ignore the child and the behavior, to not pay attention to it. Put your attention elsewhere until that behavior is subsiding. If for some reason the behavior that is interfering with your child's adjustment at that moment is more dangerous than you can tolerate, they might run away from you and out into the street. They might be hurting themselves, like banging their head against the wall. If it's unsafe, then what we would recommend is that you pay attention by protecting the child from hurting themselves, but otherwise not pay attention to the behavior. So keep your child safe. If a child were hitting their head against the wall, maybe put your hand between the head and the wall, or put a pillow between the head and the wall. If a child was trying to run away, hold the child's hand. But don't talk to the child, don't look at the child until their desire to run away is stopped, or until they have stopped banging their head. The whole goal here is to make sure that we don't teach children to engage in a very hurtful behavior with the inadvertent attention that we might be giving. The whole point here, as Maddie called it, intentional attention, is to make sure that the attention is being given for the behaviors that are safe and are opening a child's life up, not the behaviors that are closing a child's life down. The third way that we ignore is for those kinds of behaviors that are particularly overwhelming, but not unsafe, and that they're persistent. The classic example that many of us have confronted, maybe even committed ourselves when we were younger, is where we ask the same question over and over again, like I used to do in the backseat of the car. We're on a long car ride. I say, "Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" Right? Repeating the same thing over and over again. In a situation like that, it's going to be hard to put your attention elsewhere because the child is really trying to grab your attention. So one thing that often helps is you can not pay attention to the behavior, ignore the behavior, but do put your attention on the child. So if someone's saying to you, "Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" You can answer it once and say, "We're not there yet. We'll be there in about 20 minutes or whatever the time is you estimate. But we will talk about those cows we see on the side of the road. How about those big cows? Or how about that blue car that just passed? Blue's your favorite color." The point is you're talking about something different and trying to help the child get their mind off of, or even a person, who's older than a child, whether they have autism or not. If they're talking about something you don't want to talk about, you could try to suggest a different topic, and that's all this is. So those are the things that I wanted to say that sort of fit with this notion of ignoring, or as Maddie pointed out, intentional attending. But let's watch a video and take a look and see exactly how we use this kind of intentional attending.
This is good. Do you like this? So how was school today?
Good.
Yeah? Was Kevin back today?
No.
No? Oh, you must not be feeling well still, huh? Yeah, as Mom said, you had a cold. Colds are going around right now. But you know what? I bet by tomorrow he will be feeling all better. And then when you see him, you could say, "I missed you, huh?"
So, here we had a situation where, the parent is trying to figure out exactly what behaviors she's going to pay attention to and what behaviors she's not. I hope you picked up on the idea that she tried to focus on behaviors that were going to be helpful to the family having a meal together, and paid attention to those, and the other behaviors that would, like getting up and walking away, behaviors that would result in a family not really having a meal together, she was attending to in a different way. She was helping the child return to the table and finding opportunity to reinforce the idea that we're sitting here having a meal and a conversation together as a family. And obviously something important to that family and what they wanted to do together. So last time, if you were in the previous presentation, and if you're new to this presentation, I think it'll be easy to catch you up on this point, that we talk about putting together a behavior support plan. This idea that everything that you're using to try to help meet a child's needs, meet them where they're at, encourage them to try new things, to do different things in their lives, to stretch a little, to grow and develop. All those things that we do to make that happen as we're raising our kids, sometimes it's helpful to write it down, to keep track of it. And we call that a behavior support plan. You can write it on a tablet, just a regular old piece of paper. You can put it on your phone. If you can't really see this because I have the background, but I'm holding up my phone. You can put it on your phone. It doesn't matter where you write it down, but it does help to write things down. It helps because it'll help you remember what's working, what isn't working, what's helping your child have a fuller life. It will help you know how to communicate that to other important caregivers, anyone who's helping you parent your child, anyone who is teaching your child at school or in extracurriculars. It's just very helpful to have it written down. And one of the things that we do in terms of writing it down and sharing it, and when it's written down, it'll give you a prompt to revise it when you need to revise it, is that it includes every single thing that we put into our plan. So the last time we were here, we talked about how to make sure that you're analyzing the functions of behavior, why a child behaves a certain way. A lot of times behavior is about communication, but communicating what? Is it communicating a need for something? Is it communicating that they want something that they don't like to stop? Is it communicating that they want time with you, they want attention? Those are usually the things that it's communicating. Sometimes it's just communicating that whatever I'm doing right now feels good to me. But if we know that, then we can start to figure out how do we help those behaviors stop interfering with a child's growth and development and all the things that a child may want to or benefit from doing. We also last time talked a lot about how do we meet a child's needs before they really emerge, and that's this idea of prevention. We've talked about how do we set up schedules. We all benefit from schedules. I would not be here today on time giving this presentation if Amy, our fearless leader in Family Echo, didn't put it on my calendar. And that calendar wasn't enough. Amy had to text me last night and say, remember, you're presenting tomorrow. So she even gave me another visual prompt, a text, right? We all benefit from this. And our kids and adolescents and young adults who have autism are going to benefit from having schedules of some sort in their lives and visual representations of those schedules. For a lot of autistic kids, it's a visual schedule. I showed you a video last time of this, where you're using picture icons to represent different activities at different times of the day, different things that you're doing. For other autistic individuals, it may be very similar to the kinds of visual schedules that neurotypicals use, like a calendar. But the point is, we all do better with a little bit of structure to our lives. Last time we talked about praise and play and reinforcement. One of the things that Maddie underscored for me in the time between then and now is that you gotta know your kid, right? This is all individualized, and it's really important to make sure that you're targeting the individual needs and preferences for your child, for the adolescent you're working with, for the autistic young adult you may be working with. That when you're praising them in a way that they appreciate. You know, if I walked into Logan's office, one of our team members, and I said, "Hi, Logan, how are you?" He'd probably look at me like I was crazy. He would look at me like, "What are you doing? Are you drinking too much again, Dr. Butter?" No, he probably wouldn't think that. But it is a mismatch in our relationship, right? It's not something he expects from me. But if I came in, I said to him, "I really appreciated how on top of it you were during our last Family Echo session." That would feel more familiar to him. It would feel more appropriate to him. He would like that, right? And so Maddie just reminded me that it is probably appropriate for me to underscore that when we're praising kids, and it can be part of a behavior support plan, that praise needs to match the child's preference. It needs to feel good to them. It shouldn't stress them out. It shouldn't create anxiety. And then where we left off was talking about this intentional attending, this idea that there are behaviors that you definitely want to make sure you see a lot more of, because they're the things that are opening up a child's world. And there are other behaviors that are interfering with their ability to participate in the world around them, or at least in a way that we know that will help them have a fuller life. And you pay attention to the behaviors you want to see more of, and you try not to pay attention to the behaviors you want to see less of. And that's the basics of a behavior support plan that's going to be focused on trying to manage, reduce, soften the impact of any behaviors that interfere with a child's adjustment. And so you can see some of the edits that I've made here based upon feedback that I've gotten. And I really appreciate this. The word proactivity or proactive or doing something before the activity, right? And there's another way to think about it if it feels too jargony to you. That is the same thing as prevention, but I really liked how this was framed from Maddie as one of the experts on our hub. They were telling me that you really want to look for a need that a child has and understand it and try to anticipate it and try to set up the world in such a way that that need never really goes unfulfilled. And I thought that's a beautiful way of talking about what us clinical scientists call prevention strategies, or sometimes we call it antecedent management strategies. Just the idea of being really proactive about meeting another person's need, the person who you really care about, who you love. You're just trying to meet their needs before they emerge. And then the point about praise really being in balance, I thought was really good. So I just want to underscore that there on that slide. The point about writing this all down is that it highlights those times where you need to get more support, where you might have developed a plan, but you need more people to help you do it. We do have our RUBI website where you can search your state and try to find a RUBI therapist. If you have a good therapist you already like, they can also do RUBI. They can learn how to do RUBI. We have other supports in which we can direct therapists to learn more about these these interfering behavior reduction approaches. But the idea is that you probably can't do this completely on your own. It does take a clinician's eye on using our manual and putting it in place with and putting an intervention plan in place and building a behavior support plan. Our session last time and today are really focused on just trying to introduce you to the concepts and maybe giving you some ideas. You're going to be with the person you love who has autism tonight and tomorrow and the weeks ahead and the months ahead and the years ahead. You're their caregiver, and so you're going to be with them, and you might as well be with them with some of the awareness that we can offer to you as people who have done this intervention package for a long time. And so that's really our goal. But our goal is not necessarily to prescribe a specific thing for your child, youth, or young adult. So I move into what I want to talk about tonight or late this afternoon, I guess, in the East Coast where we're at, is teaching new skills. How do we teach new skills? Because the thing about trying to manage behaviors that interfere with life is that when you reduce them, they'll come back if you don't have new things that you've taught to replace them, right? And so the first strategy that we use is to reduce these interfering behaviors, and the next strategy is to build them up, build up new ones, build up more behaviors that really do open a child's world, give them new opportunities, allow them to stretch and experience new things. So that's the focus of what we're talking about tonight. There is a strategy that we use sometimes to build and teach behaviors that, I think really open up a child's world. In our clinical science, we unfortunately use the term called compliance. This has inadvertent negative connotations, right? That we're trying to teach obedience, or we're like a military dictator trying to force people to do the things we want them to do. That isn't the case. What we're talking about is, how do you help an autistic child or adolescent move through their everyday life? How do you get them through the activities that you need to do in the morning to get ready for the day? How do you stop them or encourage them to stop doing something they really like doing to go start doing something that they really don't want to do, which all of us have to do. I mean, that is a life skill, right? That we can't always keep doing the things we want to do. Sometimes we have to get up and go to school. We have to get up to go to work. We can't eat as much ice cream as we want. We usually have to stop at some point, or it'll be really unhealthy. And so this whole approach, this compliance training, was designed to help parents know how to teach stop, how to teach how do you stop doing something, but to do it in a way that doesn't say stop, that says do. So it was really meant to be a positive intervention. How do we get you doing things rather than just telling you to stop doing things? You can yell at a toddler to stop. Don't put your finger in the electrical socket. Stop, don't do that. Stop, don't do that. But wouldn't it be easier if you said, here, play with this doll, or play with this car? And now they're playing with something and their hands are occupied and they're doing what you want them to do, and they're not putting their finger in the electrical socket, right? So that's really what this intervention was all about. And in recent conversations, at some levels, we're teaching kids to be resilient. How do they actually get through their everyday life and take care of themselves in the way that they're capable of doing? And I thought that the words that were offered to me, we really are trying to guide kids to be making good choices, to be consistent about what we want a child to do and how we ask them to do it. So that is sort of the framework in which I'm approaching this now, really thinking about it as how are we building resilience in kids? And, one of the things that we want to make sure we do when we're asking anyone to do something for us, whether it's an autistic child or it's a friend who is neurotypical, a partner, a family member, we are in a situation where we need to have their attention first, right? If I'm going to ask you to do something for me, right now, Logan is supposed to be available to help me if I needed something. And I'm only picking on Logan because he's the first person in my column and I can see him. But he was looking down and he was doing something else right now. I don't know if he was texting somebody or he's writing something down. He's managing doing something. It's none of my business what he's doing. But what I do know is that if I really wanted his attention and I really needed his help, I would have said, Logan, and waited for him to look at me. And then he looks at me, right? So the whole idea here is that when we're doing this to help our kids move through their everyday life in a smoother way, we want to make sure we're close enough to get their attention, and that when they hear our voice, they can look at us. And if they're not looking at us, we wave in front of their face, or we do something that feels safe and not terribly intrusive or anxiety provoking, but we do something to get their eyes on us before we ask them what to do. And then we move in this situation where we tell them what we need them to do. We offer the request one time and not more than once. Because the other thing that happens when somebody asks us the same thing over and over and over again, they're nagging us, they're nudging us persistently. We get annoyed by that, right? If someone is sending me an email 4 or 5 times in an afternoon asking me to do X, Y, or Z for them, I'm starting to get annoyed by that. It's really good for someone to ask me to do something for them that they need me to do, but to make sure that they have my attention, and once they have my attention, they ask very clearly what they need. And that's all we're asking for in this scenario with our kids with autism, is to get their attention and be ready to say very clearly in plain English what you're going to ask them to say. And if you speak Spanish, in plain Spanish. My point is that you're not making it complicated. You're not using too many words. The goal is that you're using just the right number of words to communicate what you want someone to do. If I want someone to stand up, I just say stand up. I don't say, it would be really good if you stood up right now. I'll wait for you to stand up. All those words aren't really where we're at. The whole point here is stand up is not any more rude or abrasive than could you please stand up. So just say stand up. That's what our science tells us works best. At step 3 in this resilience training model, the idea is that you, if you need to, you provide help and support. If you're asking a child to stand up, maybe you, like they do on the football field for a player who's been tackled, you put out your arm and you offer your arm as a way to help the child stand up, right? If they might just need a little tap on their elbows, come on, time to stand up, then that's what you provide. The whole idea here is that you provide enough help that they do what you're asking them to do as soon as you ask it. Step 4, as the child is cooperating, as they're following through on what you're asking them to do, then you praise them. You say, good job, thank you for standing up. Now we can go get ready for school. Whatever it is you want to say is praise, and how you want to praise your child, it's up to you. But the whole point is that you get their attention, you offer an instruction, you help them do it, and then you praise them. And each time you're asking them that same instruction, you try to provide less and less help and support, so that there's less and less prompting that you're providing. Over time, and I've just done this through the video screens with Logan, I am asking for his attention. And I'm able to do this through, being 15 miles away from him because of the screens, right? Over time, you can get further and further away. You don't have to be completely on top of your child, but you got to build that up over time. And that's how this model works. And again, when you look at this compliance versus resilience, I actually like this new word of resilience. Let me show you how this works when you have a little bit of a struggle.
Boys, come on. Let's go. It's time for bed. Guys, come on. It's getting late. Boys, come on. Let's go. It's time for bed.
So hopefully you recognize here that their mom is way too far away to be getting their attention, right? If she were standing in front of them and she got down near their eyes, looking at both of them, and then she said, guys, it's time, right? That would be a much better way to approach this. You're wasting your breath doing that to anyone from a distance. Let's take a look at this.
No throwing. Please pick the pepperoni up off the floor. Good listening.
So here you're seeing her give the instruction, pick up the pepperoni off the floor. And as she's giving that instruction, she's helping. She's helping this child be successful. And then she can prompt him and say, or praise him and say, good job. Thank you for picking up the pepperoni. This is a critical sequence of events. The timing has to be perfect. It doesn't have to be rude or overly intrusive, but it is helping a child be successful. So in this resilience training model, the whole idea is that we want to get to the point where we are helping a child stop. So instead of telling the child to stop, we engage them in this resilience training model that builds cooperation. We give an instruction that tells the child what they should do, and we're very explicit about what that child should do. We want to make sure that we're very clear in our instructions. We're very plain spoken about it. And in this model, the whole idea is that instead of telling the child to stop, we move fast through this model. And again, if your words are better, if it makes more sense for you that we're trying to build compliance, it's okay, use those words. But I really like this framework that we're trying to build resilience. You know, we all have to do things every day that we don't want to do. And so preparing kids to help them do that with as much cooperation and pleasantness and efficiency as possible, the more we're preparing them for life on this planet. Sometimes there can be problems that come up that are difficult to manage. So for instance, if a child gets aggressive with the physical guidance that you're using, just adjust what you're asking. Switch to commands that are easier and more likely to build cooperation, more likely to build resilience. If we're asking for things that are provoking a really negative response from a child, we probably are asking the wrong things at the wrong time. The other thing is to think about using tangible reinforcers. And tangible reinforcers could be anything that you give a child that really do feel good to them, right? It could be a favorite food item or a favorite drinking item. It could be a favorite toy. It could be a favorite blanket, some kind of sensory experience, but something that is tangible and feels good to them, as opposed to just using praise. So that might be one way to also build up cooperation with this resilience training. So remember, we're talking about things that help replace interfering behaviors with more adaptive and productive behaviors for kids. And one of those approaches is this thing we call functional communication training. The idea here is that we are teaching new communication behaviors as a replacement for any kind of interfering behavior that we might have been working to get rid of. And the whole idea here is that the behavior will serve the same purpose in the child's life as the interfering behavior, but now it's more appropriate and it's not shutting their world down, it's opening their world up. So there are specific ways to teach this. So for instance, imagine a child hits to get out of sitting at the dinner table. What do you think the child's trying to communicate? Maybe they're done, right? I'm not hungry anymore. I want to go do something else. I don't like this food. They're communicating something that really probably implies that they want to get away. And so maybe what you do is you teach the child, say, all done. And maybe if the child isn't using words to communicate, instead they're using pictures or they're using hand signs, you can figure out a way to teach a very specific communication skill to that child to replace hitting in order to end their meal and get away from the table. The principles that are really critical to making this kind of communication training work are reinforcement and shaping. And I want to say a little bit more about that. When we do this training, we are really working at trying to address problem behaviors proactively. We want to teach what a child should do, not just what they should stop or not do. And it also promotes independent skills. The more a child can communicate what they want in any one interaction, the more independent they're going to be. And we also can see benefit in transferring these skills from one caregiver or one setting to another. So from parents to teachers, from home to school, to being out in the community. I'm just underscoring this idea that this is one way to promote independence. It's that important. All right, so how does this work? Well, when we're teaching this, the new communication behavior, the sign for all done, let's say, all done. You can pick any sign you want. You can do thumbs down. It doesn't matter. You know, whatever works for you and the person you're teaching. But you're going to teach some replacement behavior. But it should work very quickly. As soon as a child says all done, it should get them to the point where they're done with whatever you're asking them to do. And the replacement behavior should work every time. If you're teaching all done to a child all done, then it should work every single time. So if you're not prepared to end the meal when they say all done, then it's not the right time for you to be teaching it, because it's got to be quick and it's got to work every time. And then the third principle is really important too, that the replacement behavior should require less effort than the challenging behavior. And this theoretically is easier than a child throwing things or punching or hitting or crying even. All that probably takes a lot more effort than just doing this, right? So these are the three principles that you really have to follow to make functional communication training work. And again, I want to focus on this idea that these challenging behaviors are really interfering behaviors. They're interfering with a child's life. They're interfering with their ability to get what they want. I want a break from eating dinner. I'm done with this. You know, that's challenging to the parent because they don't want the child throwing food, or they want the child to stay at the dinner table with them longer, but the child doesn't want to stay anymore. And so teaching this behavior helps everyone have a happier experience. Of course, I'm just picking one example. Here's another case example that I want to share with you. And this is complicated. And so I have a couple different things to say about it. But the first is the initial straightforward way we talk about this. But you have a 5-year-old boy. He has a few words that he uses to communicate. But at the moment, there's something that happens. His sister takes his toy that he enjoys playing with, and then he hits her. Now, she shouldn't be taking his toy, but he hits her as a reaction. And so just like in many areas of life, the victim here and how the victim responds is probably going to get more punished than the original crime, right? The original hurt here was that the sister took the toy. He didn't have a more appropriate way to manage that situation, to cope with that situation, other than hitting her. And so his goal was to get the toy back. So what mom does in this scenario is she teaches Tommy to point to a picture of mine when he wants his toy back. And by practicing this and repeatedly taking a toy away from him and then prompting him to get it back and pointing at the sign of the picture, she's teaching him another way to ask, another way to handle this problem, a way that doesn't involve aggression, right? So that's an important skill for Tommy to learn. But it's also probably important, if you're a parent of these two kids, to be thoughtful about what his sister has to learn, right? And so we wouldn't just pay attention to Tommy hitting his sister. We'd also want to pay attention to his sister taking the toy away. Now, his sister may not be a mean girl. She may not be someone who just steals people's toys. Look, there's a communication difference here. She might have more words than Tommy, and she says, "Can I play with your toy?" And he doesn't understand what she's asking him. And so she then just grabs it, right? So who now needs some functional communication training? His sister too, right? She needs to have a new way of asking. And so the whole point here is that the parent has two places where they can teach a functional communication skill. Tommy does need to learn how to not hit. He knows how to ask for his toy back without hitting. But his sister also needs to know how to ask Tommy to share in a way that he can appreciate and respond to, because apparently that's not working well here either. So there are two intervention targets for this parent. All right, so worth considering. Remember that behavior is a form of communication. When children do not have verbal language, then this kind of training can be really important. For children who have verbal language, you could still use functional communication. I know I'm practicing that today, right? I'm trying to use different words that have the kind of impact I'm intending to have, rather than, and that's why I kept these words in red that I've edited in my PowerPoint, because I really want to work on using language that has more impact on our families than words that I might have been using 25 years ago. We all can benefit from functional communication training. I'm going to move through these slides just so I have enough time to talk about teaching skills. So you've learned about how do we teach resilience and compliance? How do we teach functional communication skills? How do we teach communication skills in general? Now, how do you teach anything you want to teach? it's important to understand the importance of explicitly teaching skills that a child needs every day. How do you tie your shoes? How do you make macaroni and cheese if you're 13 years old? I don't know. Is that when 13-year-olds making mac and cheese? I still can't make it. But my point is, whatever you want and your child or your adolescent wants to do, you can teach it if you have the right technologies, the right instructions. And so in the next few minutes, I want to just highlight some of those instructions. And ultimately, it's critical to teach a child what to do so that we're just not always focusing, and I've said this many different ways already in today's presentation, we're not just focusing on what not to do, right? We're trying to teach the skills that will help open up their world. And so there are many things to teach. We can teach play skills. A famous psychologist named Erik Erikson, what a great name, right? My name's Eric Butter, but it would be great if I was Erik Erikson. He was a really famous psychologist who did lots of things in our field. But one of the things that he said was play is serious business for kids. Play is serious business for kids. Kids learn a lot through play. And so one of the reasons we want to teach play skills when kids don't have the same level of play skills as their developmental peers is that it's through play that kids learn. And so this isn't about taking away things they enjoy. It's about trying to give them a learning platform that they can learn more things and they can grow in life. But other things, leisure skills, social skills, self-help skills, organizational skills, academic skills, coping skills, these are all sort of buckets of things that parents may sometimes want to teach their kids to help open up a kid's life, to help make their world better and more complex and more interesting, to make their days go more smoothly. That being said, don't confuse our insistence that teaching things is important with not respecting a autistic individual's individuality. You know, Erikson, the famous psychologist, also made it really, really clear that it is very important for human beings to develop a sense of self, to grow into the identity that they're going to have for the rest of their lives. And we start practicing that when we're young children and we move through our school age years and into adolescence, where it really becomes a focus of what we're doing. And when that is happening, we're becoming full and complete human beings. And every autistic person that we raise has a right to their individuality. And so we're not trying to teach kids how to play with certain toys or how to engage in certain social skills to change who they are. But we're really just trying to open up the opportunities that they have in life to make friendships, to play new things, to learn things through their play. And so I wanted to make that very clear. So when you think about what do you want to teach, these are the critical questions to ask and answer. What skills will help reduce any interfering behaviors that might be occurring? What kinds of skills will make your child more independent? Another way to say that, less reliant on you. Who wants to be reliant on their mom or dad all the time, right? What skills does the child seem to have most of the steps for, but refuses to do or find frustrating? So they're almost there, but there's maybe a step or two that is frustrating to them, so they don't do the skill at all. Like they might be okay getting dressed, but they don't know how to do buttons. And so they find that part frustrating, so they don't even approach getting dressed anymore. You do everything for them. Well, that might be something that we change, right? Because you might be able to get to the point where the child is completely independent. The final question, what would the child be most motivated to learn? What are they interested in? If a child really likes playing with their iPad, do they know how to charge it? Why don't you teach them, right? Take care of your own iPad. Notice my attempt here to also change my language, right? I'm trying to be more functional in my communication. I really don't mean problem behaviors. I mean behaviors that interfere with the child's life. One way we teach is by breaking skills down into all their various smaller steps. We call this a task analysis. And then once we have all those steps, all those individual components of teaching a particular task, like imagine making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Go get the bread, get the peanut butter, get the jelly, get a butter knife, get a plate, put the bread on the plate. Yeah, I'm not going to go through the whole list. You can imagine what that's like. But you write all those steps out, and then you sort of see, where am I going to start teaching this kid one of those steps? And when you teach one step and then you add the next step and you add the next step, just like chains are linked together, you're linking the steps in teaching how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or how to brush your teeth, or how to put on your socks. You're linking those small steps into a chain. So chaining is a way of teaching through a specific sequence of responses in which the completion of each response provides a cue for the next response. It helps you know what's coming next. Some things to consider. Chaining really will benefit children with autism by not requiring them to learn every step at once. You're not overwhelming them with all the steps. You're only teaching one step at a time. It will be important to decide what order you teach the steps. Sometimes we teach the steps from the first step forward. You know, get the sock, put the sock over your toes, pull the sock over to the middle of your foot, and so on, all the way till you're pulling the sock up over your calf, right? Or we might teach all the steps in such an order where we do it in a backward manner. So I put the sock on the child by going over their toes, going through their midfoot, up over their ankle, and then right above their ankle, I say, put on your sock. And the child will then be prompted to pull their sock up over their calf. They do the last step first. And then guess what I do? I chain it to the second to last step. And then once they get up to the ankle, I chain it to the third to last step, which might be bringing it to the middle of the foot and rolling it up over your heel, right? So that backward chaining technique can be really successful for a kid. Regardless of how you're teaching it, forward or backward, or maybe you're beginning to think about the easiest step first. No matter how you're teaching it, it's going to be really critical that you praise and reinforce their progress through this. I thought this was a really interesting quote that Maddie offered me, just something to consider. And I think Maddie is really responding to this idea that it can be frustrating when you come across one particular step. And so sometimes modeling the whole kit and caboodle can be helpful. It really just speaks to this idea that shaping learning through task analysis and chaining is a really, really good way to teach. So defining the forward chain and the backward chain is on this slide. Beginning with teaching the first step of the chain, then teaching steps forward from that. Get the bread, put it on the plate. Get the peanut butter, put peanut butter on one side, one piece of bread. Get jelly, put it on the other piece of bread. I'm teaching that in a forward manner, right? Backward chaining, begin by teaching the last step in the process and then teaching the steps backward to beginning. So maybe the last step in the process is cutting that sandwich in half. Right? And then you take a bite. So you get rewarded right away, you know? And then the next day we make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. We teach you about putting the two pieces of bread together. I put the peanut butter on, I put the jelly on, but the child now puts the two pieces together. We cut it in half. Now they know two steps and they take a bite. They're much closer to the reward, right? They're much closer to the benefit. When I'm making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, I like making it, but I much prefer eating it. So when you're teaching in a backward manner, you're much closer to the reward. And eventually you'll get to the first step. So the last concept that I really want to cover today is this idea of using prompts to teach. Prompts are things that we use, and we're using them all the time, that really help a child be successful. We might guide a child by their arm when we're trying to get them to move from one place to another. We might give a hint, like pick up your toys, or pick up the big block, right? Some way of trying to encourage them to do the thing we exactly want them to do. There are multiple different kinds of prompting. You saw in Maddie's comments just a second ago, modeling can be really important, exactly showing everything you want the child to do. We use verbal prompts all the time. Stand up, pick up the big block. Visual prompts, like a visual schedule is really a visual prompt, or a visual prompt could even be a gesture. Sit down right here, sit here, right? We can be very clear about our visual prompt if we want. We often use things like first then boards. First you do this, then this happens. The then probably being more reinforcing than the first thing you're asking them to do. If you're using something like that, you're using a visual prompt. And sometimes we use physical guidance and physical prompts. Again, you don't want to do that if a child doesn't like to be touched. You don't want to do that if it's going to cause a child to be reactive to you. But if touching is something that helps, use it. So how do you use prompts? There are a couple things to keep in mind. Regardless of the prompt that you're using, make sure you only use the level of prompt that is needed. You don't want to provide more help than someone actually needs, because people like to be independent, including autistics. We all want independence in our life. We all want autonomy. And so don't help me with something I know how to do. I remember my niece always used to say, I know that, when she was 3 and 4 years of age. So if they know that, don't help them. Use several different kinds of prompts to teach a skill. Don't just depend upon one kind of prompt. Try to use lots of different prompts. The more prompts you use, the easier it'll be to help a child move away from needing prompts. You'll be able to fade those prompts much faster. If a child is frustrated or having trouble learning, it might be that you have to help them more, add more prompts, but also be really thoughtful about fading prompts as you can. There are a couple other kinds of prompts that I just want to sort of highlight. I'm not going to have a lot of time to really teach you these, but one kind of prompt or response prompts, these are the kinds that I've been talking about. They're exactly the kinds of things that I've been using as examples. But when stimulus prompts are a contrast to that, stimulus prompts are some kind of cue in the object or material you're working with in some way that suggests to the child how to respond. We all use these when we were learning to write. You know, you have those dash shaded letters that look like an A, and you were supposed to come in with your crayon or your marker or your pencil and connect the dashes and darken the gray so that it became an A, right? That's a stimulus prompt. You're something about what you're presenting to the child that guides them to be successful at what they're doing. And we have lots of examples of how you can use stimulus prompts to teach. If you're working with a behavior analyst or a RUBI therapist, they certainly can give you those ideas. But if you're thinking about like how do you fade a stimulus prompt, for instance, it's easy to fade them over time, with the goal being that you eventually get to the point where there's no stimulus prompt whatsoever. Again, go back to tracing letters. Maybe at first the dashes are close together that you have to connect to make the letter. The gray is very dark, but over time the gray gets lighter, the dashes get further apart till eventually there's no dashes and there's no gray prompt. There's just a blank piece of paper and you say write the letter A, and the child can write the letter A because you faded from a very heavy prompt to a lighter prompt. And then I do like to teach this idea of something we call the time delay cue. Time delay prompts are presented after a time delay. The idea is that if I wanted a child to learn a new word, like right now, again, Logan is at the top of my screen, so I'll say something to Logan. I'll make up a word and I'll say, Logan, Gatsy. Logan doesn't know what I mean. He has no idea what Gatsy is, right? But if he's looking at me, Logan, look at me. Good, thanks for looking. And I said, Gatsy. It's a rude point. Now he knows. I've shown him a gesture of that. And I've done that at exactly, if I was in the same room with him, I would be able to prompt him by pulling up his finger and saying Gatsy. So I'll say Gatsy, and I'll point. And Logan should point back at me. You know, if you can see him, but he's pointing. And then next time, I'm going to count 1 second in my head before I give that gestural prompt. I'll say Gatsy, 1 Mississippi, and then I'll give him the prompt. And he does it. Now this time he's going to beat me because I'm going to wait 2 seconds. I'm going to say Gatsy, 1 Mississippi. There, good job, Logan. You got it. You know Gatsy, right? So I'm praising him because he learned it. And all I had to do was count in my head to 2. And now I don't have to help him anymore. All right, I'm coming up close to my time. And the very last concept that we teach is this idea of maintenance and generalization. Once you've taught new skills, how do you keep it happening over time? How do you generalize it to different people in different settings so that the child just isn't doing it with you, but is able to do it in other places and with other people? And there are specific technologies that we use to do that. I would encourage us to think about generalization in some ways as a more critical first step than maintenance. And I appreciate the edits that my teammates have made to help me think about it that way. What we're doing in generalization is we are really focusing on learning skills in new situations after treatment ends. So let's say a child has learned how to put his coat on a coat rack at home. Can you teach that in school? A child has learned to brush his teeth independently at home. Can you teach that for overnights at grandma's house? Right? You want to make sure it's happening in multiple settings with different people. And then maintenance is also important. How do you hold on to those improvements over time? And when you think about, let me just skip here to maintenance. When you think about maintenance, sometimes you have to continue reinforcing a child. It's still needed, right? And if you want to fade reinforcement, then you start thinking about maybe sometimes not praising a child or offering reinforcement for success every single time, but maybe you do it every 2 times or every 3 times, or on average every 5 times, but sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 7, right? The idea is that you still have to use reinforcement, but you got to get smarter about using it to keep the behavior, the new behavior strong. Let me pause there because I think our time is pretty much up. But if you're building a behavior support plan, you're now at the point where you can add new things, right? And you can get more support about teaching new things. And you can teach one skill after another because now you know how to prompt, you know how to task analyze, you know how to use chaining and backward chaining versus forward chaining. So I hope that this has been helpful to you and that you got some new ideas. I'll stop there and turn it back over to Amy.
Thank you very much, Eric. I know that's a lot of information. We're going to make sure you have the recording for this, and we're also going to make sure we have slides. We have a few minutes for questions. So